It seems whenever I think about Jimmy's relationships in this show when it comes to romance, it really gave me the impression that this episode is following something with Betty Quiverlin other than being a love interest. And since that Nick is mostly the main character in this, mainly in the first half, they probably wanted Nick to have a running gag of breaking his leg multiple times, which led to his downfall in Season 3 and potentially more in Season 4 if it ended up happening. Out Dawn Spotlight is where a school is performing a play called Macbeth in Space, and Jimmy wants to be the main protagonist because the main protagonist is going to have a kissing scene with a female, and with Betty Quiverlin having the female role, Jimmy refuses to back down from this opportunity, even though that Nick ended up having the protagonist role. And due to Nick breaking his leg, this gave Jimmy the opportunity to be Macbeth in the play. He also made an invention that can make great effects, and to tell you the truth, judging of how that his inventions cause so much problems to everyone, it really sums up a lot that no matter how hard Jimmy tries, it's always bad luck that comes in his way. And to tell you the truth, the bad luck that he gets in this is way more ruthless in comparison to the other situations that he got himself in other episodes. Jimmy's goal of getting the kiss from Betty Quiverlin in the play itself, it's his obsession, obviously, that he can't control of, but for how I keep thinking of his relationship with Cindy, the best way to describe that type of relationship is in the episode Stranded, because that episode really sums up a lot of how the relationship itself just isn't into me, and just thinking about Jimmy and Betty in this episode after looking at Vanishing Act, it's become crystal clear that even if this is Jimmy's obsession, it's more obvious that Betty would have done a lot more if she was actually taking herself seriously for how she acted towards Cindy in Vanishing Act. Because for how those planned episode in Season 4 about her, Cindy, and maybe Libby inside of Jimmy's lab, it really feels like that they would have given her depth in her character, and at least give her a scene with Jimmy when it comes to them expressing each other normally without Jimmy's obsession and Betty being nice towards Jimmy. This really feels like that the episode would have aged differently if the Season 4 actually happened. I really feel like if Jimmy never made the invention, if he got the wall without anything in the way, his situation would have been less problematic, considering that the play itself, they would still have inventions, mainly Carl, Cindy, and Libby having hover boots or hovercrafts underneath their shoes to fly, without any ropes to carry them up in the air. All the while, he'll have a better time getting a kiss from Betty Quiverlin without anything going on. Because when it comes to Jimmy's invention, it's a good invention, but at the same time, if he didn't took the job of being a stage crew or effects person while doing the effects, then I'm pretty sure that his problems wouldn't be as severe, because what the invention caused is mainly lifting the entire school up in the air is anticlimactic. No, it's not because it's animated poorly, because this is TV animation, and it's not the fact that there's no real villain in this. It just feels like, for how it's all structured in order to have Jimmy deal with an obstacle, at the very least, it's not really his fault, since it's mostly Cindy and Sheen that mostly wrecked the invention to cause this to happen. As far as I'm concerned, it really sums up that Jimmy just got screwed when it came to bad luck from other characters. Granted, I don't blame Sheen that much, but when it comes to Cindy, she really wants to become a star in Corky's show that is extremely famous, and judging of how Cindy is so obsessive towards Corky, I can't even tell that Cindy desperately wants to be with Jimmy, all the while Betty is around him, or the fact that she's focusing on something else bigger than Jimmy, which made me think that whole mood swings is mostly over the top and just thrown in for the sake of having humor of some sorts in order to become famous. But believe me, this isn't a problem, but it just sums up of what I think about Cindy as a character, and believe me, the Stranded episode is just close enough to make me understand how she feels the way she feels, but again, when I get to that episode in the future, you'll understand why. Getting back to Nick, if he actually had a character arc when it comes to him hanging out with Betty Quiverlin, rather than just doing the play in this episode, I will probably see some kind of competitive competition between Jimmy and Nick, and instead of having a different direction of what Nick would have ended up having later on down the line, it would have been something interesting. Granted, it's mostly the boy versus boy getting the goal in the end, but for how I see Nick being portrayed in this, mainly with the running gag of him breaking his leg, it just makes me feel like that his presence in the 4th season, while promising, won't look good when it's not on paper, because when it's on paper, it may look promising and look good, but when it comes to the final product, it could be the opposite. I would say about the positives of this episode is Bobby and him being the antagonists. I have to admit that even though that this isn't a real bad guy since that he's performing a play, it really sums up that Jimmy facing out Bobby can sum up that Bobby can still act and actually perform. And the mistake that they did by having Bobby knocking off Jimmy's sword, which leads to him giving him his sword in order to perform the actual scene that should have happened. It's humorous and is actually done in a way that Bobby just didn't intentionally make. And to tell you the truth, the choreography in this is impressive, even though that it's all animated. But as far as I'm concerned, when you do an episode involving a play and you put so much time into it, with this episode being 22 minutes, it really feels like that there was some kind of effort in order to make the play battle between Jimmy and Bobby work. When it comes to Carla, Cindy, and Libby being the aliens, with Cindy trying to get attention from Corky, it really makes me feel like that Carla and Libby are mostly qualified in order to be part of Corky's show, considering that Cindy tries too hard. Even though that there was one scene that she did saw Jimmy trying to get Betty, but at the same time, it doesn't really feel like that she's bothered by it, and in all honesty, Jimmy never got into Cindy's way whatsoever, so yeah, the communication between the two characters are good at times, but in this episode, not so much. And I can totally understand as to why Corky prefer Carla over Cindy, because as far as I'm concerned, I may feel sympathy towards Cindy on trying to move forward with her life, but at the same time, it really makes me feel that there's a setback that she has that she just doesn't understand. This episode is underrated, like I said before, and if it was aged differently when it came to the season 4 episode, I would have probably seen this episode as Jimmy being a third wheel when it comes to Betty and Cindy, but it really feels like it isn't, because every time I look at this Invention act, it seems that Jimmy isn't really a third wheel whatsoever. In fact, this doesn't even feel like a romance triangle between him, Betty, and Cindy at all. Even though I'm gonna be taking another break from this show, with Steven Universe Marathon happening at the end of next month, I would try to at least make Stranded my next review of Jimmy Neutron, since it's literally one of the only episodes that I want to review, other than the 44-minute specials that I also want to review. But then again, there's so much going on and so many options that last-minute decisions could happen, but you never know. Sometimes whenever I think about relationships in the show, it's not like the other relationships from other cartoons. And even though I do look at videos centering around the relationship, mainly the Alpha J show, it only made me feel like that this is just getting a lot more confusing rather than understanding the positives of the relationships. But I'll get to that when I get to Stranded in the future. I'm giving Out Dawn Spotlight a 7.5 out of 10.